Thanks for listening to this audio podcast from Crossgate Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We invite you to visit us at crossgate.org. It is our hope that you will hear from God and draw closer to Him through this service.
I would ask you to take your copy of God's Word, find Nehemiah chapter 2, please. Here's what prayer does for us, my friends. I heard this illustration just this week. You know, if you had a glass mason jar filled with water from a river, and there was sediment and so forth in it, and you shook it up, that water would be cloudy, all the sediments would be all over the place, and you wouldn't be able to see through it. But if you were to set that jar down within probably 2 to 3 minutes of just not moving and not stirring, all that sediment would settle to the bottom, and that water would be crystal clear. That's what prayer does for us. You know, we don't want prayer simply at Crossgate Church to be a window dressing where it's a transition from one thing to the other. Of course, it's important to pray during those times, but I am absolutely convinced more now than ever that we as a church need to spend time praying for the sake of praying. And that's kind of what we're doing with our prayer partner time. I appreciate so much all who are participating, and certainly I hope the rest of you get a sense in the coming days that this is not some massive thing that you might be committing yourself to, or we're going to force you to pray up on the stage or whatever. That's not the point. We would simply love you to maximize your opportunity to participate in those moments when we're not stirring, when we're not moving, when generally there's silence. Allow that sediment in your life that's so moving all over the place throughout the week, allow it to settle, that you might have a crystal clear connection with the Lord. Nehemiah chapter 2 and 3 this morning. So a couple weeks ago, my oldest daughter and I made a quick trip down to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth to scope the place out. And of course, driving down to the Dallas area and back, we had to stop at, everybody's favorite gas station on steroids, Buc-ee's, right? I mean, we stopped at Buc-ee's, the home of beaver nuggets. Can you say beaver nuggets? All right. The word for today is beaver nuggets, all right? The home of the cleanest restrooms in the world, Buc-ee's. The home of gas pumps as far as the eye can see. That's Buc-ee's. Everybody knows about Buc-ee's, right? And one of the reasons why everybody knows about Buc-ee's is because of all of those mile markers on the road. Is that not true? 262 miles to Buc-ee's. You can hold it, right? It's potty time, 9 miles to Buc-ee's. 1 mile, right? There's these mile markers all up and down the highway that let you know that Buc-ee's is getting closer. But isn't that true of mile markers on the road, no matter what they're for? Mile markers serve two very important purposes. One, they let you know you're making progress, right? You have some forward momentum in your journey. The other thing about mile markers is that they let you know you're getting closer and closer to your destination as you're taking that road trip. Well, folks, as you know, we are on the road to revival at Crossgate Church. The road to revival as we study this Old Testament book of Nehemiah. Last week, as you will remember, we talked about the fact that the road to revival is paved with prayer. Prayer is the on-ramp to the road to revival. There ain't no way that you're going to be on the road to revival, and I'm not going to be on the road to revival unless we're going deep in prayer with the Lord. That was last week's message. Simply, we're crying out to God saying, God, I want more of you in my life. That's the road to revival. That's the on-ramp. Today, we're going to be talking about some mile markers on the road to revival. Some mile markers on the road to revival that are going to let us know that we're making progress and that are going to let us know that we're getting closer to our destination. Now, of course, the story of Nehemiah, we kind of hit a broad overview last Sunday. Just to remind you, Nehemiah was actually a Hebrew, but he was living in the Persian capital of Susa. And he was a part of this exile where so many of the Jews and the Hebrew leaders had been taken away from Jerusalem and Judah and taken to this foreign land. At some point in time while he was there, some messengers, some friends of his from Jerusalem came and visited, and they gave him a report that Jerusalem was in shambles, The temple was in shambles. The wall around the city was in shambles. There was rubble. The people were in distress and all of these things. And after a deep season of prayer, Nehemiah got on the road to revival. He went back to Jerusalem and led the efforts to rebuild the city, specifically rebuilding the walls. But please remember what we said last week. The story of Nehemiah is not ultimately a story of urban renewal. Okay? It's not just a story about urban renewal. It's not simply a story about brick and mortar, but it is a story about a vibrant revival of people drawing closer to God, beginning with the man Nehemiah. And that's why we're calling this series The Road to Revival. Let me remind you a couple things about revival today before we get into our passage. First of all, remember this. When we talk about revival, we're not primarily talking about salvation. We're not talking about people trusting Jesus for the first time making a faith commitment, coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus. That's important, and that's oftentimes a byproduct of a revived church. But when we talk about revival, we're talking about Jesus followers, meaning people who have already committed themselves to Jesus Christ, calling out to God saying, God, I need more of you in my life. God, there are some secret sins in my heart, and it's time for me to deal with them and get honest with myself and honest with you. When we talk about revival, we're talking about people saying, God, I'm so tired of depending on myself. I'm so tired of depending on my own devices and my own abilities. God, I want to depend on you. That's what we mean when we're talking about revival. Now, let me put it in Crossgate terminology, because as you know, we have a very simple purpose statement at Crossgate Church. We make more and better disciples for Jesus Christ. That's what we do. We don't try to do it 10,000 things well. We're going to track on making more and better disciples for Jesus Christ. More disciples, people coming to faith in Jesus for the first time. Better disciples, that means people who are already Jesus followers going deeper and deeper and getting more of God in their lives. So when we talk about revival, we're talking about disciples becoming better disciples. And I'm telling you, over the course of this series, God's going to be looking across our congregation, and He's going to be looking for better disciples, people who are going even deeper with the Lord. That's what we mean by the road to revival. I pray that's true of you. I'm telling you, God is at work in my life and has been for the last few weeks in ways that are just still kind of just blowing my mind. I don't even know where it's going to go for me. But I can tell you that God has squarely put me on that road to revival, and I want more of God in my life. Now, let's talk about some mile markers on that road to revival. The first one is this: life change. Okay, the very first mile marker on the road to revival is life change. Let's begin reading, and we're going to read from Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 11 to chapter 2, verse 5. Let's read that together. Now, this is Nehemiah talking. I was the cupbearer to the king. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. And then I was very much afraid. And I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. By the way, remember I told you Nehemiah was a man of consistent prayer. Nearly every chapter in this book you find him praying in one capacity or the other. Okay, so I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you may send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. All right, now again, remember what's going on in Nehemiah's life. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king. That wasn't just some little job. I mean, he was basically a confidant. He was very, very close in proximity and in relationship to the king of Persia. And he was bringing these drinks and the wine and all these things to the king. And remember, this has been several months. 4 months have gone by since the prayer that he prayed in chapter 1. And he can't help it. He's sad. He's brokenhearted. The king sees what's going on, and they get into a conversation. And finally, Nehemiah says, I would ask that you send me back to Jerusalem. Send me back and let me lead the efforts to rebuild the city of my fathers. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, because what we're seeing here is we're seeing a change in Nehemiah's location and a change in Nehemiah's vocation. All right? And of course, we're talking about physical changes here, but the image ultimately is one of a spiritual transformation, both in Nehemiah and in the lives of the people of God. But think about some of the ways that God changed his location and his vocation. He went from Susa, which was one of the royal cities of that nation of Persia, to Jerusalem, that looked like a broken down trailer park compared to the palace that he was living in. Right? He went from being the cupbearer of the king. You talk about a position of prominence and power. He went from being the advisor and the cupbearer to the king to basically being the city manager of Detroit, Michigan. Right? I mean, what's to commend about that? He goes from being over here in this splendor, this comfort and convenience and all the rest of the palace, to probably living in nothing more than a shack when he got to Jerusalem. And he went from being, now watch this, he went from being close in proximity to power, but not having to deal with the leadership responsibilities. I call that the bonus without the onus. And he went to Jerusalem, where now the weight of the world is on his shoulders, and he's got the onus without the bonus. He's living in squalor. See, what I'm telling you folks is that God made a significant change in his life from point A to point B. But I will tell you this, here's the thing. Nehemiah was miserable living in the palace, but he was filled with the joy of the Lord living in rubble, because it was God's plan. And God called him to that, and God was working in his life. You know, in my own life, we talk about life change. We talk about what it means to see God show up in your life and experience change. And I shared with you last week, as I shared with you this morning, God's at work in my life, folks. God has brought me to a place in the last 3 or 4 weeks where I truly want more of him in my life. And I feel like I'm in the ocean. You know, when you go to the beach, there's several different ways that you can interact with the ocean. Is that not true? Sometimes you can stand in the surf up to your knees, and the water's just kind of lapping at your legs there. You're just kind of enjoying it, taking it in. You can step out a little further, and now you're having to bounce up and down to keep your head up out of the water, right? Because maybe the trough of the wave comes to your stomach, but the crest of the wave would be over your head if you're not bouncing up and down with the water, right? And you can go out a little further than that, and you can be swimming where your feet are just above the ability to touch. So now, yes, that requires some faith and swimming and so forth, and you're not actually touching the bottom. But then there's also that area of the ocean that's farther out. That's farther out than just swimming above the sand at the bottom. I would tell you in my Christian life for many years, I feel like here and there I've been swimming, but I've been swimming with my feet just above the area where I could touch. Yes, it requires faith. It requires a sense of God's presence in your life and all of that, and purpose and direction and all of that God provides. But in the last few weeks, I have come to a reminded realization that there is a boundless, limitless ocean of God's glory and goodness out there. And I want to go out deeper. God is saying, come out a little farther. Come out a little farther. Now notice something. When you press into the deeper water, things change. Not because you're seeking change, but because you're seeking depth. Right? Let me say that again. When you press out into deeper water, things are going to change. But not because you're somehow seeking change for the sake of change, but because you're seeking depth. And when you seek depth, change follows. Revival truth number one. I'm going to give you 3 truths today. Revival truth number one is this. Life change is not primarily about change. It's about more of God in your life. Life change is not primarily about change. It's about more of God in your life. See, when we start talking about life change, some people get kind of nervous. Is that not true? Because listen, a lot of folks come to Crossgate and they love Crossgate. They love the music. They love the teaching. Hope they love the teaching. You know, they love so many things about Crossgate. But it's like, you know, Phil, I didn't really come here to have these radical changes in my life. I kind of want to just enjoy what's going on at Crossgate. Okay? For some people, you get on the road to revival, God may very well call you to change your location and your vocation. God may say to you, you know what, I don't want you living in Garland County. I want you living over in, and he names some place either inside or outside of Arkansas, or maybe even overseas. He might change your vocation. He might say, you know what, I've got something else for you. I'm calling you to something else. That may be true of some people. I don't know. It may be that God speaks into your life and says, there's a secret sin in your life. And he puts his finger of conviction on that issue in your life, and he presses down to the point of discomfort to generate life change. Or maybe, just maybe, God may have you radically repurpose and somehow reposition your calendar in your use of time. As you press into God, you realize, you know what, I'm spending a lot of time over here when I could be spending time over here. And suddenly you take a red marker to a lot of your calendar and just, God does something amazing with your calendar. Okay? And I know, when we start talking about life change, some people say, man, if I get on the road to revival and I seriously press into God, He may take this thing away from me, or He may take that thing away from me, or He may have me do this and not this, and I don't know if I can handle that. Here's something to remember. When you press into God and you go deeper into that boundless, limitless ocean of God's glory and goodness, all that other stuff's not even going to matter, folks. It's not even going to matter. And look, we've only been in this 2 weeks. I don't know all of what's going to happen in my life, let alone in our church. I can tell you this, God has already led me to rearrange my calendar to make time for a lot more opportunity of prayer and silence with God. I would also tell you this. I didn't tell my wife I was going to say this. Brace yourself. God's beginning to work on me with my marriage. You say, well, dang, Phil, I mean, you and Shara probably have as good a marriage as anybody I know. That may be true, but the Holy Spirit of God has started to work in my life and has showed me some areas where I've got some serious, serious gaps and blind spots as a husband. And I want to be a better husband by the power of God and the grace of God. And that's just some of the, I'm telling you, if you take one step toward God, He's going to open the gates on some other things in your life. That's okay. I'm cool with that, okay? But life change is one of the mile markers on the road to revival. Mark it down. Here's the second thing, all right? The second thing is this. Second mile marker is personal testimony. Personal testimony. Let's go back to Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Now, before I read this, let me just give you the backstory, because we're not going to cover every verse in this chapter. Nehemiah basically travels to Jerusalem. He rides around the city, does a little what we call in the army a leader's reconnaissance. He checks out all the rubble, he checks out all these issues and things, and then he gathers the leaders and the people together to kind of give them his plan and tell them what God has been doing in his life. So here's what he said to the people, verses 17 and 18. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them, now here's the personal testimony, and I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us arise and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. All right, now I want you to notice a few things about this testimony that Nehemiah shared. First of all, it was a recent testimony. Write this down. It was a recent testimony. Nehemiah didn't say, hey guys, let me tell you about when I got saved when I was 7 years old. Okay? Nehemiah didn't say, let me tell you about this summer camp experience I had in high school 25 years ago. As good as those things are, Nehemiah said, here's what's God doing in my life here and now in the last few days. This is what God has been doing in my life, guys. It's incredible. It was a recent testimony. Second of all, it was a transparent testimony. If you look at that scripture passage, you see that Nehemiah described the situation, warts and all. He didn't try to put lipstick on a pig. I guess that would be a good thing in Arkansas, right? He didn't try to put lipstick on a pig or somehow sugarcoat. He said, we are dealing with some serious, serious challenges here, y'all. But also notice that it was an invitational testimony. Because after Nehemiah said, here's what God is doing in my life, he said, y'all want to get in on some of that? Right? There was this invitation to come and be a part of the revival that was already taking place in his life. By the way, why did these people get on board so quickly with Nehemiah? I think this is incredibly important. And we're reading between the lines a little bit here. Here's the reason why the people got on board with Nehemiah. It wasn't because he rolled out all these blueprints that he had drawn and he said, all right, guys, I got it all planned out. We need to do this. Here's the materials. We got all the planning. I've done all the planning, guys. I got this. It wasn't because he was somehow a great organizer, a community organizer, right? He wasn't a great organizer. The reason why I believe the people got on board with Nehemiah, because they looked at him, they listened to him, and they said, he's been with God. He has been with God. And of course, he couldn't have had that testimony if he hadn't had that experience and that prayer, that season of prayer in his life in chapter 1 that we talked about last week. This is very similar to what it says in Acts chapter 4 and verse 13. I don't have it up on the screen, but this is where the apostles were preaching. They were boldly witnessing for Jesus. The Jewish rulers rolled him up, arrested him. And Acts chapter 4 and verse 13 says, they could not deny that they had been with the Lord. This is the part of this message that is hitting me right between the eyes, y'all, because I pride myself on being organized. It would blow y'all's mind to see some of the stuff I carry around, that I've got every little nitnoid detail, man. We got it all. I'm a details guy. But at the end of the day, and I think even just this morning as we were praying here on the platform, I said, God, I do not want to bring plans and details to these people. I simply want them to see me and say, he has been with God. He has been with God. Now, what about you? What about you? You know, the revival truth number 2 is this. Revival spreads on the wings of testimony. Revival spreads on the wings of testimony. What about you? What would be your testimony today of what God is doing in your life? Would it be recent? Again, I'm not interested in how you got saved when you were 7 years old or what God did in your life in high school. Those are important. But what I'm asking about is, what is God doing in your life right now? In the last several days, the last few weeks, is God at work in your life? Here's why this is so relevant, by the way. Because, you know, a lot of people don't have a Hell's Angel salvation testimony. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe you were saved at a young age, or even as a middle school or high school student, and you weren't a Hell's Angel motorcycle rider, right? And then you hear somebody stand up and say, man, I got saved from the guttermost to the uttermost. I was a drug addict. I was a criminal. I did this. I did that. I was unfaithful to my wife. All these things. And you're thinking, man, I don't really feel like I got a testimony. First of all, you do have a testimony. If you're saved, you've experienced just as much of Jesus Christ as the Hell's Angel who got saved and went into ministry. But here's the other thing. There is power in being able to say, here's what God is doing in my life right now. Right now. That's important, to have a recent testimony of God's power in your life. Here's the second thing. Would your testimony be transparent? Would you truly share what God is doing in your life in light of your life? And guess what? At Crossgate Church, it's okay to not be okay, right? You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to be perfect to come to Crossgate Church. We've got plenty of people whose lives are in shambles. But you're at the right place. You're at the right place for God to work in your life. Be transparent. You know, last Sunday, I shared some things with y'all about what God was doing in my life about prayer, and I was very transparent. And I told you, it took a lot for me to swallow my pride and tell y'all that last Sunday. Folks, let me tell you something. My phone and my email and my social media blew up last week. People from church all over, people I'd never heard from. Pastor Phil, I want to tell you what you shared and being transparent with us, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Right? People appreciate transparency when you tell them what God is doing in your life in spite of how messed up you are. People appreciate that, to be transparent. Now, it's also invitational, just like Nehemiah. An opportunity for you to say to someone else as you're telling them what God is doing in your life, man, you need to get in on this as well, right? Man, I want to talk to two groups of people in here just for a moment, okay? Just two groups of people. One is our life group leaders, and two is all the parents out there. All right, so if you're a life group leader or you're a parent, or a grandparent for that matter, just listen to what I'm telling you. I would encourage you sometime in the next week, whether you have a meeting with your life group or you're sitting around the dinner table with your family, tell them about what God is doing in your life right now. Just give them a recent, transparent, and invitational testimony of what God is doing in your life in the last, say, week or two. Okay? You say, Phil, I don't think I have a recent testimony. Okay, that's fine. I'm sure there's a lot of people in here like that. I'm not down on anybody that might not have a testimony. So here's what you do. For the next 6 days, carve out some time to be silent before the Lord and to spend time in prayer, begging God to give him more of yourself. Do that for 6 days. I guarantee you God will show up and you will have a testimony of what God is doing in your life. Life group leaders, do it. Share it with your life group and encourage them to share. Set the pace. Mom and dad, again, share with your kids and then encourage them to share. Encourage them to share with you as a family what God is doing in their lives. Remember, the revival spreads on the wings of testimony. There is an incredible power when God's people say, in brokenness, God has showed up in my life. God is working in my life. That's the second mile marker, personal testimony. Here's the third, corporate action. Okay, corporate action. Because after Nehemiah shared his testimony, after Nehemiah called the people to join in and get on the road to revival, start building the city, then they took action. Here you go, Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zakur, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, repaired. And next to them, Zadok, the son of Bana, repaired. And the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa. Now watch this. But their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work. Notice a couple things that's taking place here, folks. First of all, they took action. Okay? They responded to Nehemiah with action, but they also responded to Nehemiah with action together. Together. And there's a couple things we need to talk about. Talk about corporate action, responding as a group, responding as the people of God on the road to revival. And I'm just going to get very practical here, okay? Very practical, a couple things. First of all, let's talk about our worship services. Let's talk about our worship attendance. I saw an article a few weeks ago put out by Tom Rainer, who certainly is one of the leading church analysts of our day. With his ministry, Church Answers, and so many other things that he has going on. And he put out some interesting data that he's been studying. Pre-COVID, okay, that's before COVID, that was back, let's say 2019, when everything was 100% normal, back before anybody even heard of COVID, all right? The average churchgoer in America that was actually a part of a church attended, on average, 2 Sundays per month. Okay, 2 Sundays. That's not to say that there weren't people coming every single time the door was open. Certainly that was my family, okay, many of you. Some people were hardly coming maybe Christmas and Easter. So, you know, it all averages out. But the average was 2 Sundays a month. Post-COVID, as we come out of COVID, the data is showing that number has dropped to 1 Sunday per month. Okay, 1 Sunday per month. The average churchgoer, again, average it all out, 1 Sunday per month. You say, well, what's that all about? Well, here's what happened, okay? In a lot of churches, okay? And I would say it's true of Crossgate. When COVID hit and churches everywhere were off campus for a season, all right, watch this. We tried everything we possibly could to make church accessible, all right? And I think we did an awesome job. I say we, huge shout out to Byron Lee, the tech team, those folks who put these services together every week, our worship team, and the online product that we were putting out last April, May, June, and July. Listen, pastors that I knew that were watching our stuff, guys that I know all over the country said, man, what Crossgate is putting out is really, I mean, it is amazing what y'all are able to put out every week. It's great, the tech, just the presentation. So we made church very accessible for people everywhere. Man, I can watch church from my own living room. I don't have to, but here's the problem, okay? In so many churches across our land, people confused accessibility for convenience. Accessibility for convenience. And listen, there is a very fine line between convenience and disengagement. Very fine line between convenience and disengagement. And so many people have simply become disengaged on a very, very widespread level. I would tell you, friends, and I totally got it, right? I mean, many are watching online right now. Some people have lingering health issues. Some people have work commitments and all the rest. But I would tell you, if there is not a massive reason why, God's will is for you to be physically present in God's house on God's day. Okay, I'm telling you, God sent me to tell you that. I mean, how do you expect to be a growing follower of Jesus who lives and loves like Jesus and leads others to follow him if you're at church like once a month or twice a month? I mean, again, there are certainly exceptions, by all means. I totally understand that. But to see the kind of corporate action that we saw in Nehemiah, that's the reason why they were able to see the results and to see God show up in their lives, because they were engaged, actively engaged, okay? That's the first thing, worship attendance. Here's another thing, just talk about corporate action, life group engagement. Okay? Right now we've got, I'd say, probably about 30 life groups at Crossgate Church, many of which meet on campus on Sunday mornings, some of which and others meet off campus throughout the week in people's homes. That type of thing. I'm convinced, our elders and pastors are absolutely convinced, it is impossible for you to be a growing follower of Jesus apart from small group, biblical community engagement. Why am I saying this? Okay, next Sunday, as you know, we're moving to one service, right? We're all going to worship together at 9:30. I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. Here's one of the reasons why I can't wait on that. Because as we go down the road to revival, listen to me, you are going to see and hear some things in our worship services that are going to surprise you, okay? But those are very difficult to duplicate across services. Do you know what I mean? Very difficult to just turn the faucet on and off on that kind of stuff, okay? And for us to all experience it together is going to be fantastic. I can't wait to see the entire church body gathered for worship, okay? But here's one of the unintended consequences that might happen. Let's say, and especially, let's just say you have children ages 6 to 18, okay? So if you're here and you have a child 6 to 18 in your sphere of influence, listen up. My concern, and our pastors and elders' concern, is this. You're going to come, and if you're not a part of a life group, that is, you're going to come to church at 9:30 and you're going to have your family with you. Boom, and then you're just going to leave. You'll just leave because you're not engaged in a life group at 11 o'clock. But here's the problem. Not only would you miss out, but your children will miss out also, because that's when we do all of our children's ministry, our elementary age ministry, our middle school and high school and all the rest. I would challenge you, and again, without looking at rosters and names and all the rest, I think we're talking about 30 to 40 families at Crossgate Church over the course of a month who we think this might happen to without getting engaged on a more deeper level. I want to encourage you, if you're not a part of a life group, come see me in Next Steps afterward. Let's get you connected with one of our many fantastic life groups here at Crossgate Church. We've got a ton of great options, okay? Getting engaged in a life group is critical to being on the road to revival. Now, here's one other thing as we wrap this up. One other thing is this, meeting a need, okay? Meeting a need. Of course, at Crossgate, we've got a very simple, comprehensive, disciple-making pathway that we call Next Steps. And the on-ramp to the next steps pathway is simply asking this question, as Pastor Rob said in the welcome time, what's my next step? Because at Crossgate, we believe everybody has a next step to take with Jesus Christ, okay? Those 4 steps are, of course, make a decision to trust Jesus Christ or follow the Lord in believer's baptism, to join a group, primarily to become a part of a life group at Crossgate, become a member, to get on that membership pathway and attend Membership Matters once a quarter whenever we offer that. And lastly is meet a need. And meet a need is that others-focused step whereby we pour into the lives of other people. And I will tell you, a revived church is going to be an others-focused church. A revived church is not simply a church full of consumers who are here for whatever they can get out of it, but they're looking for ways to pour into the lives of other people. Here's where I want to get very, very practical on this, folks. And I share this lovingly as your pastor, okay? Next week, as we go to one service at 9:30, and then we have life groups at 11, there is an emerging need that will be a critical need in our church, okay? And that need is for people to lovingly invest in the next generation in our preschool ministry, specifically at 9:30, okay? I mean, think about it. If someone invests in our children, our preschool-age children at 9:30, then technically they're going to miss church that Sunday. Because when they get done with that, then they'll go to life group and they won't actually be in here. First of all, they will not have missed church, okay? Church is when you serve. Church is when you love on others. Church is when you worship the Lord through investing in the next generation, okay? Now, here's the thing. Crossgate Church demographically is a young church. Okay, we are a young church, definitely multi-generational. Okay, I mean, I look across this congregation, I see people of all different ages, but primarily we lean in the direction of being a younger church. And younger churches have lots of children. Younger churches have lots of children, and I love that. That's a great thing. Because in contrast, listen to me carefully, you could visit any number of hundreds and even thousands of churches across our nation this morning, right now, walk past their worship center and into their children's area and their nursery, and guess what? There will be 0 children in that church. 0 children in that church. And that church is probably no more than 5 to 10 years away from closing their doors. That's happening. Hundreds of churches are closing their doors every single year because they're not leaning into the next generation. Please hear me as I tell you this, my friends. God has entrusted the next generation to Crossgate Church. I'm telling you, God has entrusted the next generation, and I believe, listen, there's a lot of great churches in Garland County. A lot of great churches in Garland County, but I believe the future belongs to Crossgate Church because we are leaning into the next generation. We certainly represent all the generations, but we are leaning into the next generation. And a revived church, one of the mile markers of a revived church is that we would have to turn away people who volunteer to minister and invest in the next generation on Sunday morning. We'd have to turn people away. You know, I want to close this message by simply challenging you. I'll challenge our leaders. If you're in a leadership position at this church, I would encourage you and challenge you to set the pace for the people you are leading. I've already talked to all our elders. Every one of our elders said, I'm in. On the 20th, next Sunday, on the 27th, our elders are going to be leading the way, as they should. And I'm so grateful they are. I'm proud of our elders. We are leading the way. If you're a trustee, a deacon, I would encourage you to lead the way and set the pace. If you're a life group leader, I'm looking forward to personally calling you this week and talking with you about how your life group can embrace this awesome opportunity. And look, folks, as your pastor, I'm not trying to put you on a guilt trip, okay? Because drive-by guilt trips produce short-lived results. That's not the point. What I'm trying to tell you is that a church that is truly on the road to revival is going to be an others-centered church. And at the end of the day, listen to me. This sermon is not about, meeting a need. It's not ultimately about life group engagement or worship attendance. Heck, it's not even about personal testimonies or life change. This message is about getting more of God in your life and crying out to God and said, God, I need more of you in my life. God, I need more of you. and then just letting the results come as they may. We are calling you, as I call myself, to press deeper into God and to go out further into that boundless, limitless ocean of God's goodness and God's glory. Let's pray.
We invite you to join us in person at our campus located at 3100 East Grand Avenue in Hot Springs, Arkansas. If we can pray for you, send us an email at prayer@crossgate.org. Thanks again for listening to our audio podcast.